Welcome to today's tutorial. In this video, we'll be designing a 3D deodorant product visualization from scratch. We'll cover everything from shaping the container to adding those final touches to make it look realistic. Let's get started. All right, let's get started. First up, we're going to clear our scene, so select everything by pressing A and then hit delete. Next, I'm going to enable the screencast tool, so every button I press will pop up in the bottom left corner. This way, you can follow along with each step. For the deodorant container, we'll start with a basic cylinder shape. So press Shift-A to bring up the Add menu and choose Cylinder. Now, in the Properties panel on the lower left, set the number of vertices to 16. This will give us a smoother shape without adding too much complexity. With our cylinder selected, hit Tab to enter Edit mode. Now let's adjust the height. Press S to scale, followed by Z to scale only along the Z-axis. Drag it up to elongate the shape into something that looks like a deodorant bottle. Next, let's add some edge definition. Press Ctrl-R to add a loop cut. You'll see a line appear around the cylinder. Move it down slightly and click to place it. Now, with that loop cut still selected, press Ctrl-B to bevel it. Move your mouse to adjust the width of the bevel, rounding out the edge a bit. Now we're going to create the indentation at the top. Press E to extrude, and then immediately right-click to snap it back in place. This keeps it level, but with new geometry. Now press S and then Shift-Z to scale it, but only along the X and Y axes, just a tiny bit to give a slight taper. Next, let's add another loop cut, so press Ctrl-R again and place it near the top. For a bit more detail, select the top edge loop by holding Alt and clicking the loop. Then press Ctrl-B to bevel it, and use the mouse scroll wheel to add a second segment within that bevel. This will smooth it out. Switch to Face Select mode, which you can do by pressing 3 on the keyboard, then click on the top face. Press I to insert a new face, scaling it inwards, then press E to extrude it downwards to create a recess. To add some final cleanup, press I to insert another face, and then delete it to leave a clean open space at the top. Make sure you're in Edge Select mode, which you can activate by pressing 2 on the keyboard. Now, select this edge loop by holding Alt and clicking the loop you want. Once that's selected, press Ctrl-F to bring up the face menu and choose Grid Fill. This option helps to fill in faces neatly within that edge loop. Now let's start defining our shape with some additional cuts. Press Ctrl-R to add a loop cut, then slide it down a bit to adjust the shape. Next, select this edge loop and press G twice. This activates the Edge Slide tool, so you can slide it down slightly for a smoother transition. With that done, we'll make a small inset. Press I to insert the edge just a bit. Then press E to extrude it outward. Now press I again to create another inset, and then E to extrude it downwards, forming a nice recessed area. Go ahead and delete the face at the bottom to keep things open. Now we'll refine the shape with more loop cuts to define the edges. Hit Ctrl+R again to add a loop cut, then slide it down to tighten up the edge. Add another loop cut and slide it up to define the top section. Let's add one more loop cut in the middle for even more control. Now, press Ctrl-R and scroll your mouse wheel to add multiple loop cuts in this section, creating more geometry to round out the shape. Switching to Face Select mode, 3 on your keyboard, hold Alt-Shift and select this loop of faces around the edge. Press E to extrude, and then right-click to snap it back in place. Now press S and Shift-Z to scale it on the X and Y axes only. This will slightly widen the shape without affecting the height. When that's done, hit Tab to return to object mode. Now press Ctrl-2 to add a subdivision surface modifier at level 2. You can check that it's applied by going over to the Modifier tab. There you'll see the subdivision surface modifier listed. Let's return to edit mode by pressing Tab again. We need to add a few more loop cuts to finalize the edges. Press Ctrl-R to add a loop cut, slide it up to sharpen the top edge, Then add another loop cut and slide it down to firm up the bottom. For the final touches, press Ctrl-R again and scroll to add multiple loop cuts. This will smooth out the shape and make the edges pop. Alright, let's jump into edit mode and take a look at our object so far. To get a little more definition in this crease, hit Tab to go back into edit mode. Now, hold Alt and select this edge loop to grab it in one go. Press Ctrl-B to bevel the edge and drag slightly to create a nice defined bevel. Once you have it looking right, press S to scale it down just a touch. This will refine the edge a bit more. When that's done, right-click and select Shade Smooth to give the surface a polished look. With that finished, it's time to move on to the deodorant cap. Start by entering Edit mode with Tab, then hold Alt and select this top edge loop here. Press Shift-D to duplicate the loop, and then right-click to snap it back in place without moving it. Now, press P and choose Separate by Selection to make the cap its own object. This will keep it distinct from the rest of our model. Now, hit Tab to return to object mode, select the edge loop we just separated, and then press Tab again to enter edit mode on this new object. Press A to select everything, and hit E, followed by Z, to extrude along the Z axis. Drag it up to start forming the cap. Press E and S a few times in succession to extrude and scale it down bit by bit, creating a more refined look for the cap. Next, let's fill in the top. Press Ctrl F and select Grid Fill to cover it evenly. To further define our edges, add some loop cuts. Press Ctrl R, add a loop cut, and slide it down to sharpen the bottom. Do the same at the top by pressing Ctrl R and sliding the loop cut up. This will give you a nice solid structure for the cap. Once you're happy with it, hit Tab to go back to object mode and right-click to Shade Smooth for a polished finish. Now let's move on to the main deodorant stick. For this, we'll start with a sphere. First, select the deodorant container, then press the backslash on your keyboard to solo it, allowing us to focus solely on this object. Press Tab to enter edit mode again. First, hold Alt and click on this edge loop here to select it. Next, we need to bring the 3D cursor to the center of this edge loop. To do that, press Shift S and choose Cursor to Selected. This will place our 3D cursor directly in the middle of our selection, making it easier to position the next shape precisely. Once that's done, press Tab to go back to object mode, and then hit Shift-A to add a sphere to our scene. Now go ahead and press Tab again to enter edit mode on this sphere. To get a better view of how everything is lining up, press Alt-Z to enter X-ray mode, allowing us to see the entire shape through the sphere. Next, press S to scale the sphere down just a tiny bit, adjusting it so it aligns nicely with the circumference of the container. To check how it's matching up, you can toggle back to solid view by pressing Alt-Z again at any time. Now with X-ray mode on, Alt-Z, press G, followed by Z, and slide the sphere down slightly so it's positioned correctly within the container. Then press S, followed by Z, to scale it down along the Z axis, shaping it to fit neatly within the container. Once you're satisfied with the placement, hit Tab to return to object mode, then right-click on the sphere and select Shade Smooth to make it look polished. Now let's set up the parenting for the deodorant. With the deodorant selected, hold Shift and select the bottle. Then press Ctrl-P and choose Object, Keep Transform. This action will parent the deodorant to the container, meaning any movement of the container will automatically move the deodorant along with it. Once that's done, press the backslash to bring the cover back into view. To give the entire model a slimmer look, press A to select everything in the scene, then press S, followed by Y to scale it along the Y-axis, or X in your case if it's oriented differently. This will create a sleek, streamlined appearance for the whole model. Alright, now let's make some final adjustments to our model before moving on to the scene setup. First, press G, followed by Z, to move the deodorant model up a bit and position it correctly. And that's it for our deodorant modeling. Now it's time to set up the scene. To create a split view, go to the top corner of the workspace, click and drag to open a new panel. In this new panel, we'll add a camera by pressing Shift-A and selecting Camera from the list. To snap the camera to our current view, press Ctrl-Alt-0 on the numpad. This aligns the camera to match our perspective. Now, press N to bring up the side panel, go to the View tab, and make sure to check Lock Camera to View. This option will allow us to adjust the camera angle as we like without losing alignment. To check how everything aligns in X-ray mode, press Alt-Z and make any final adjustments. Then you can press R followed by Y to rotate the entire scene along the Y-axis for a more dynamic angle. With the camera selected, let's go to the Camera Properties tab and change the focal length to 100, giving our scene a slightly zoomed-in look that enhances focus on the model. Now, press N again, uncheck Lock Camera to View so we don't accidentally shift the camera as we continue working. Next up, let's create the bubble effect for the background of our scene. For this effect, we'll add a sphere, but instead of adding an actual sphere, press Shift-A and select a cube instead. Here's why. Starting with a cube and subdividing it will yield a more mathematically perfect sphere shape. Once the cube is in the scene, press Ctrl-3 to apply a subdivision surface modifier at a level of 3. You can verify this by checking in the Modifiers Properties tab. Our cube is now smoothed into a sphere shape. To finalize this shape, make sure you hit Apply on the subdivision surface modifier. Now hit Tab to return to Edit mode, scale the sphere up, and move it down into place to complete the effect. Alright, now we'll smooth things out by right-clicking the sphere and selecting Shade Smooth for a polished look. Next up, let's create the main effect using a force field. Press Shift-A, go to Force Field, and select Force. With the force field selected, go to the Physics Properties tab. Here, we're going to change the strength from 1 to -1, which will pull everything inward instead of pushing it outward. Now, select the sphere we just created and add a soft body physics modifier. Go ahead and play the animation, and you'll see that we have a soft body effect in action. Our object is bouncing around like it's made of soft material. But we don't want it bouncing in place. To control this, uncheck the goal option in the soft body settings. This will allow it to move freely. Once we've unchecked goal, play the animation again. You'll see it's moving around, but it's falling downward due to gravity. To fix this, scroll down in the soft body settings to the Field Weights section. Reduce the gravity to 0 by sliding it down to 0. This change will keep our sphere floating and free to move inward, drawn by the force field. If we play the animation now, we'll see our sphere getting pulled in, giving us a nice effect. Next, let's make sure our sphere can interact with the deodorant bottle. To do that, select the deodorant bottle, go to the Physics Properties tab, and add a collision modifier. Now, when we play the animation, you'll see the sphere colliding with the deodorant. But there's one more adjustment we need to make. The effect is a bit too exaggerated, with the sphere deforming too much upon impact. To tone this down, select the sphere, go to the Edges section in the soft body settings, and check Stiffness. This will help the sphere hold its shape better, even during collisions. Alright, let's go back and play the animation again. Now you'll see the sphere maintains its form a bit more while still colliding smoothly with the deodorant bottle. Alright, so we have our collision looking pretty smooth at this point. Now, let's find a spot in the timeline where the animation has a good position and feel. Somewhere around here should be fine. When you're happy with it, make sure the sphere is selected, then go to the Modifiers Properties and apply the Soft Body Modifier. This will lock the sphere in its current position, preserving its final form as we continue. Next, with the sphere still selected, let's add some extra smoothness by pressing Ctrl 2 to apply a subdivision surface modifier at level 2. You can see this added smoothness in the viewport right here, giving the sphere a refined look. Now let's add some variation to the scene by adjusting the lid. Select the lid and press G followed by Z twice. This moves it along its local Z axis, allowing for some precise movement. Let's also rotate it just slightly to add some interest. You can press R to rotate it freely. Notice that the origin point is still at the center of the grid, which makes the rotation a bit tricky. To fix this, with the lid selected, go to Object, choose Set Origin, and then Origin to Geometry. This will align the origin to the lid itself, making it much easier to rotate and adjust. Feel free to keep rotating until you find an angle you like. I think this angle works for now, but I might also want to move the camera slightly for a better composition. Alright, now we're ready to add a new soft body collision effect for the lid. We'll follow a similar process as we did with the sphere. So, press Shift A and add a cube. With the cube selected, press Ctrl 3 to apply a subdivision surface modifier at level 3. You can check this in the Modifiers Properties tab, where you'll see the subdivision applied. Now let's apply this modifier. Once that's done, go into Edit mode by pressing Tab and scale up the cube a bit, just enough to fit over the lid without overwhelming it. Move it upward so it's in a good position for the scene. Next, right-click and select Shade Smooth for a polished look. Just like we did with the first sphere, go to the Physics Properties tab with the cube selected, add the Soft Body Physics modifier, and uncheck Goal so it can move freely. Under Field Weights, reduce the gravity to 0 so it doesn't fall down. Then, in the Edges section, check Stiffness to help the cube maintain its shape during the animation. Alright, now if you haven't noticed, we haven't added the collision modifier to the cover itself, just to the main body of the deodorant. So let's go ahead and fix that. Select the cover, head over to the Physics Properties tab, and add a collision modifier, just like we did for the deodorant body. Now, when you play the animation, you should see some nice interactions happening with the cover as well. This kind of effect can take some tweaking, so don't worry if it doesn't look perfect the first time around. Experiment with the positions of the spheres and the intensity of the collision until you get something you're happy with. I think I've got something I'm happy with here, so let's move forward. Now that we're set with the collision, select the second sphere we created, go to the Modifiers tab, and apply the Soft Body Physics modifier. This locks in the shape and position of our sphere, keeping our animation consistent. Alright, next up, let's add some additional bubbles around the deodorant bottle to fill in the empty spaces and add a little more visual interest. Press Shift A and add a UV sphere to act as a bubble. Right-click it, select Shade Smooth, and then move it up and place it near our model. Now to add more bubbles, simply duplicate this sphere by pressing Shift D and place the duplicates around the deodorant to create a balanced composition. Now, we'll need a background to complete the scene. Press Shift A and add a plane, which we'll use for the background. Rotate it by pressing R, then X, and type 90 to rotate it 90 degrees on the X-axis. Scale it up to ensure it fills the background of the scene, then rotate and position it so it's aligned with the camera and sits behind the objects. And there you have it. We're all done with the modeling of our deodorant bottle, including the bubbles and background setup. In the next part, we'll dive into texturing and material setup to really bring this scene to life. If you're ready for part 2, check out the link in the description or click the link on the screen to jump right in. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next part.